1 Peter 3, verse 15 says, "But in your hearts set apart Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have." Hey everybody, I'm Mark from ApplyGodsWord.com, a place where we apply the Bible to your life. In this video, I'm going to give you some pointers on how to have a conversation with somebody when you don't know that person. Maybe you're single and you kind of like someone, but you don't really know them that much, and you just want to go over there and talk to them, but you're not really sure how. Or maybe you're new at a certain church and you just want to get plugged in. Or maybe, like we just read in 1 Peter 3:15, you want to get better at evangelism. And as we know, to evangelize, you really need to be able to talk to somebody. So that's why I think this is a really important topic to discuss. Now, the first thing I'll say is throughout this video, I'm mostly going to be sharing my opinion. I'll be sharing some Bible verses, but this is a really subjective topic. And that's really the first thing I want to say. Conversations should be natural. You might be somebody who this video isn't needed for you because you know how to have a conversation, you have your own style, and that's great because there's not one way to go about doing this. This video is really for those of you who struggle in this area, where it's like pretty fearful to even think about just approaching someone you don't know to have a conversation. You just don't know what to say. I'm going to give you a structure in this video that will help you a lot. So the key to any good conversation is much like a tennis match. You got to hit the ball back and forth. In a good conversation, the same thing is occurring. One person's talking, one person's listening, then the other person starts talking, the other person is listening. It's all about receiving and giving. So you always want to be hitting that ball back and forth. So how do you get this started? How do you get going right from the start? So you see someone you don't know. Point one is to introduce yourself while also stating your intentions, why you're introducing yourself. The reason I add on that little part there of stating why you're introducing yourself is because if you just walk up to somebody and you just say, "Hey, I'm Clara, what's your name?" You know, that's a kind of awkward because when someone comes up to you and you don't really know the context for why they're introducing them, you're kind of always waiting for what's next. You're on the defense until you know the context for the conversation that you're having. If you don't know someone's intentions, you're waiting to figure it out. And you're defensive until you figure out what's happening. Are they trying to sell me something? Are they going to rob me? Like, what's going on? Why are you talking to me? Because sometimes this isn't a normal thing. So by going up to someone and saying, "Hey, I'm Clara. I'm new to this church and I'm just trying to meet people. What's your name?" Or on the other side, maybe you're saying, "Hey, I'm Clara. I've been going to this church a while, but I haven't seen you before. What's your name?" When you open up with your name, telling them your name, but also stating your intentions, then they know what's going on. Oh, this person is trying to meet people at church. They're new. Oh, this person's been here a while and they know that I'm new. They're just being nice and introducing themselves. Or for example, maybe you're at the gym and you see someone working on a piece of a workout equipment that you don't know how to use. You can walk up to them and say, "Hey, I'm Clara. I see that you know how to use that piece of equipment. Would you mind showing me? And what's your name, by the way?" Boom, there you go. Now you're in a conversation and you at least have stated your intention so that they have an understanding of what you're doing. And it makes people a lot less defensive. The second thing you're going to want to do to keep this conversation going after you've introduced yourself and stated your intentions is by talking about the environment that the two of you are both in. So in this context, again, we're talking about having a conversation with someone you don't know. So I mean, the key to a conversation is having something in common. If you don't have anything in common, you're really not going to be able to have a conversation because it's kind of hard to hit the ball back and forth when you don't know anything about that person. So what do? Well, the one thing you do know about someone is that they're in the same environment that you're in. So if you're both at church, you want to ask a question about church. If you're at the gym, you want to ask a question about the gym. If you're at the park, talk about the park or the weather, something that you both have in common. Obviously, these conversations aren't exciting and thrilling, but you got to work into a conversation. You can't get deep when you first meet somebody. I'm not really a person who enjoys small talk, but I understand the importance of small talk, especially when you first meet somebody. It's a social way of like giving time to get to know each other, kind of settle into the conversation so that you can then transition into something a little bit more interesting. I actually think Jesus used this method in John 4. If you're not familiar with that passage, you might want to go back and read it. It's pretty cool. Jesus starts talking to a Samaritan woman that he doesn't know. And the first question he asks her is found in John 4, 6 through 7. It says, Jacob's well was there. So Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." So if you read the rest of John 4, you'll see that Jesus gets in this really in-depth conversation with this woman. They start talking about some really personal things, her past sexual sins. She's living with all these guys. They talk about theology. They talk about Samaritans and Jews. And they have this really in-depth conversation. But Jesus started with the environment that they were in. He's talking there. It was hot. There was a well. She's drawing water. He's thirsty. Boom. He talks about the environment, and then it progresses into a deeper conversation. So again, the first thing you're going to want to do, share introduce yourself with your name, because when someone knows your name, they feel like they know you. Then you give them the intention for why you're introducing yourself, like what are you doing, and then talk about the environment. What do you have in common right now? The place that you're both standing, the building that you're in, the things that you're doing, that common link. Talk about that at first. So if you meet someone at church, you can say, "So, I just started coming to this church. How long have you been coming? How have you gotten plugged in?" You could ask, "Hey, I'm new to this church. I'm looking to get involved. What would you suggest?" An open-ended question is usually best rather than a closed question where it's just a one-word answer. So whenever possible, definitely try to ask open-ended questions. So the examples are endless. You have to be creative. I don't want to give you a million list of opening lines that you could ask. Just literally think about what would be a good question that you would want to know about the environment that this person might know. So point 3 is where you're going to transition away from the environment, and now you're going to start focusing more on the person. This is where you'll start asking personal questions. It's helpful to follow this steps here, because if you immediately jump to asking personal questions before talking about something a little bit easier like the environment, it still might be a little bit off-putting. It's just too much too soon. Like, "Hey, what's your name? What do you do?" That can just be a little bit too much too soon. So you ask a question about the person, and then ideally you're going to want to either share something of your own experiences that relate to what they say next, or ask them a related question to what they just said. So you ask them an opening question like, "So what do you do for a living?" And then you listen to their response. If that's something that you can relate to, well then boom, you can start sharing something. And then you want to ask a follow-up question that relates to what they already said or to something that you're saying in your part of the conversation. The reason you want to try to stay as close as possible to one topic, because when you go up to somebody and you just start asking them a bunch of random questions, it can feel like you're playing 20 questions or like you're interrogating them. "So, what do you do for a living? So, where do you work? So, how long you've been coming here? So, what do you like to do?" Like, those are all so random. It's not really producing good conversation when you just are asking a bunch of questions. So you really want to listen to what they're saying and then ask an interesting question in relation to that. So that way you can actually have a good conversation and it all kind of flows together. Usually when you ask someone a personal question, they'll then ask you the same personal question. And then again, you're in this conversation. If for some reason the person might be a little bit awkward themselves and they don't ask you the same question, well, then ask them another question or switch topics if that one's not going anywhere. But again, you want to switch from the environment now to the person, because here's where it's going to kind of see whether or not there's any kind of connection. At this point, if there's no connection, it's just stale, well then, you tried. But this is where you're really going to start having a true conversation, because you can't talk about the weather forever. When you meet somebody and you have this connection about things, that's when a friendship occurs. For example, in C.S. Lewis's book called The Four Loves, if you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. It's an awesome read. It's all about different types of loves. But within this book, C.S. Lewis talks about friendship. And here's what he says. The typical expression of opening friendship would be something like, "What? You too? I thought I was the only one." So when you meet somebody and you have a personal connection with that person and you share some unique information or experience with each other, that's when you can start building and growing a friendship with that person. So the way you close a conversation with somebody that you just met is by leaving an open invitation to that person. So you have this conversation, you talk about the environment, you talk a little bit about personal stuff, and you're sensing, okay, it's time to kind of close this out. The way you close it out is by having an open invitation. So you guys are at church together. Okay, hey, it was great meeting you. See you next week. And so therefore you left it open for next week. Or if you are feeling a little bit bold that day, or you feel like you just had a really great connection with somebody, you can leave an open invitation and saying, hey, it was really great talking to you. Would you want to go get coffee? Are you free anytime next week? And again, that's a little bit bold, but if you feel like it went really well and you're sensing it's time to make a move already, leaving the conversation with an open invitation is a great way to conclude. Just remember, conversations are meant to be natural. This is really just an outline. If you really don't know how to start and what to do, you don't have to follow this outline perfectly. It's just meant to help those of you who might struggle with talking to someone that you don't know. Well, don't forget to subscribe and like this video if you enjoyed it. I'm Mark from ApplyGodsWord.com. Thanks so much for watching. God bless.